The sledgehammer trembled in Sarah's hands as she stared at the demolished remains of her beloved pool deck. 20 years of family memories lay scattered in concrete chunks across her backyard. But it wasn't the destruction that made her blood. Run-cold it was the pristine legal documents clutched in Karen's manicured fingers, and the sinister smile spreading across her neighbor's face. "You have 48 hours, Karen whispered, her voice dripping with venom, "or you'll lose everything." What Sarah discovered next would shatter everything she thought she knew about the woman living next door. And the morning sun cast long shadows across the Hendersons' backyard as Sarah Martinez stood at the edge of her above-ground pool, watching her 8-year-old daughter Emma take what would be their final swim. The pool had been their sanctuary for 5 summers, a place where birthday parties bloomed, where Emma learned to hold her breath underwater, where Sarah floated away her stress after 12-hour nursing shifts. "Mom, watch this," Emma called out, preparing for another cannonball that would send chlorinated water splashing over the vinyl liner. Sarah forced a smile, her chest tight with the weight of necessity. The pool had to go. After David's sudden departure 6 months ago, taking half their savings and leaving behind only divorce papers and empty promises, every penny mattered. The heating bills, the chemical costs, the constant maintenance, it was a luxury she could no longer afford. "That's my girl," Sarah called back, but her voice cracked slightly. She turned away, not wanting Emma to see the tears threatening to spill. That's when she noticed Karen Blackwood standing at her kitchen window, arms crossed, lips pressed into that familiar thin line of disapproval. Even from 50 feet away, Sarah could feel the judgment radiating from her neighbor's gaze like heat. From asphalt, Karen had been watching them for months now, ever since David left. Not the casual neighborly observations of suburban life, but something more intense, more calculated. Sarah had caught her photographing their backyard on multiple occasions, always with some excuse about documenting property conditions for insurance purposes. "Emma, time to get out, honey," Sarah called. "The pool guys will be here soon." 5 more minutes? Emma's voice carried that pleading tone that usually worked on her father but had lost its power since he'd chosen his 25-year-old secretary over his family. "Now, sweetheart, we talked about this." Emma's shoulders slumped as she climbed the ladder, water streaming from her Little Mermaid swimsuit. "I hate that it has to go away." "I know, baby. But sometimes we have to let go of things to make room for new adventures." The lie tasted bitter in her mouth. There would be no new adventures, only the grinding reality of single motherhood on a nurse's salary in a neighborhood where she increasingly felt like an outsider. At precisely 9 a.m., the Martinez pool removal service truck rumbled. Into their driveway, 3 men in work clothes emerged, led by a weathered foreman named Pete, who'd given Sarah the most reasonable quote. "All right, ma'am," Pete said, consulting his clipboard. "We'll start by draining her, then dismantle the frame and liner. Should have everything cleared out by this afternoon." Sarah nodded, watching as they connected the drainage hose and began the process of emptying 5,000 gallons of water. The steady stream flowed across her yard toward the street drain, carrying with it the last remnants of happier times. That's when Karen appeared. She emerged from her house like a woman on a mission, her perfectly styled blonde hair unmoved by the morning breeze, her yoga pants and designer athletic top suggesting she'd never actually broken a sweat in either. Everything about Karen Blackwood screamed studied perfection, from her professionally landscaped yard to her luxury SUV that never seemed to collect dust. "Excuse me," Karen called out, her voice carrying that particular pitch that made Sarah's teeth clench. "I need to speak with whoever's in charge here." Pete looked up from the drainage valve. "That'd be me, ma'am. Pete Martinez." "I'm Karen Blackwood," she announced, as if the name should carry weight. "I live next door, and I have serious concerns about what you're doing here." Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks. "Karen, this is my property. I can remove my own pool. If I want to." "Actually," Karen said, producing a manila folder from seemingly nowhere, "you can't. Not without proper permits." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. "What are you talking about?" Karen's smile was razor-sharp. "I've done my research, Sarah. Pool removal requires environmental impact assessment, proper drainage permits, and notification to the homeowners association, none of which have been filed." Pete scratched his head. "Ma'am, we've been doing this for 20 years. Above-ground pools don't usually require This is a planned community, Karen interrupted, her voice rising. Every exterior modification requires HOA approval. And considering the environmental impact of draining chlorinated water into our storm system, she trailed off, letting the implication hang in the air. Sarah's hands began to shake. Karen, please. I can't afford to jump through bureaucratic hoops. The pool company is here now, and I've already paid. That sounds like a personal problem. Karen cut her off. But it doesn't change the law. Emma had been watching from the sliding door, and now she stepped outside, still wrapped in her towel. Mom, what's wrong? Sarah knelt beside her daughter, struggling to keep her voice steady. Nothing, sweetheart. Just some grown-up complications. Karen's expression softened marginally as she looked at Emma, but her resolve remained steel. I'm sure you understand, Sarah, that we all have to follow the rules. Property values depend on it, property values. I'm trying to keep my house, Karen. I'm trying to feed my daughter and pay my mortgage. Your financial situation isn't my responsibility, Karen replied coolly. But maintaining community standards is everyone's responsibility. Pete stepped forward, clearly uncomfortable with the escalating tension. Ladies, maybe we should know, Karen said firmly. I'm calling the county compliance office right now. This work stops until proper permits are filed. She pulled out her phone, and Sarah watched in horror as Karen dialed with practiced efficiency. This wasn't a spontaneous complaint Karen had planned this moment. Yes. Hello. Karen spoke into the phone, her voice switching to a concerned citizen tone. I'd like to report unpermitted construction activity at 1247 Maple Grove Lane. The next 20 minutes passed in a blur of phone calls, raised voices, and official terminology that made Sarah's head spin. Pete and his crew stood awkwardly by their equipment while Karen wielded county codes like weapons, each regulation a fresh cut against Sarah's already bleeding finances. When the compliance officer arrived, a tired-looking man in a county truck who clearly had better things to do, Karen was ready with documentation. She'd printed out HOA bylaws, environmental regulations, and permit requirements that Sarah had never heard of. Ma'am, the officer addressed Sarah, I'm afraid your neighbor is correct. This type of work requires permits, even for above-ground pool removal. The environmental impact assessment alone takes 2 to 3 weeks to process. Sarah felt the world tilting. How much permit fees, environmental assessment, HOA filing, ... You're looking at around $1,500, plus the delay. $1,500? Sarah's emergency fund had exactly $347 in it. Pete looked at her with genuine sympathy. I'm sorry, ma'am, we can't proceed without the permits. We'll have to reschedule once you get everything sorted out. As the pool company loaded their equipment and drove away, Sarah stood in her backyard staring at the half-drained pool, no longer functional, but now a muddy monument to her. Financial limitations. Karen lingered by the fence, studying her manicured nails. I hope you understand, Sarah, this isn't personal. It's about maintaining standards. Maintaining standards, Sarah repeated slowly. Is that what you call it? I call it being a responsible neighbor. Emma tugged at her mother's shirt. Mom, are we going to fix the pool? Sarah knelt down, meeting her daughter's confused eyes. I don't know, baby. I honestly don't know. When they went inside, Sarah collapsed onto her couch and opened her laptop. Maybe there was a way around this, some loophole or exception she could find, but as she navigated through county websites and HOA documents, the reality became increasingly clear. Karen had boxed her in perfectly. Every regulation Karen had cited was legitimate. Every fee was mandatory. Every delay was unavoidable. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from her mortgage company. Payment due in 5 days. Then another from the electric company. Past due balance requires immediate attention. The pool sat in her backyard like an accusation, half empty and completely useless, accumulating mosquitoes and costing her money she didn't have for maintenance she couldn't afford. That evening, as Sarah tucked Emma into bed, her daughter asked the question that had been haunting her all day. Mom, why is Mrs. Blackwood so mean to us? Sarah smoothed Emma's hair, searching for an answer that wouldn't frighten an 8-year-old. Some people have F. Karen Blackwood stood at her kitchen window, her manicured fingernails digging crescents into her palms as she watched. Sarah Martinez's triumphant smile from across the yard. The pool was gone completely, professionally, irreversibly gone. where there had been leverage just hours before. There was now only disturbed earth and the sound of Pete's crew packing their equipment. Her silk robe billowed as she spun away from the window, her mind already calculating angles of attack. Sarah had outmaneuvered her first gambit, but Karen hadn't built a real estate empire by accepting defeat gracefully. She grabbed her phone and speed-dialed her husband's office number. "Robert, it's me. We have a problem." Robert Blackwood's voice carried the weary tone of a man who'd been fielding his wife's problems for 15 years. "What now, Karen? The Henderson woman. She removed the pool. Isn't that what she wanted to do in the first place? Without permits, Robert, without following any of the procedures we put in place. She just ... did it." Silence stretched across the line when Robert spoke again. His voice had shifted from weary to interested. Karen paced her marble kitchen floor, her bare feet silent on the cold stone. "I don't know yet, but she had contractors here at dawn, and now it's done, completely done." "That's actually impressive," Robert mused. "Most people would have spent weeks trying to navigate the permit process. Whose side are you on?" "The winning side, darling. Always the winning side." Karen could hear papers shuffling in the background. But this does complicate things. If she filed the proper paperwork retroactively, if she documented the environmental impact correctly, if she followed proper disposal protocols. Then what? Then we don't have a violation to leverage. Karen's reflection caught her eye in the kitchen window. Blonde hair perfectly styled, even at 7:30 a.m., skin maintained. By monthly chemical peels, everything about her appearance calculated to project success and control. She'd spent years perfecting the image of the ideal neighborhood guardian, the concerned citizen who just wanted to maintain property values. "There has to be something," she said. "Nobody does a project this size without making mistakes. Maybe, but Karen, if she's smart enough to outflank us on the pool, she might be smart enough to cover her other bases too." That's when Karen noticed something that made her blood pressure spike. Sarah was walking directly toward her house, that manila folder still clutched in her hands. "She's coming over here," Karen whispered into the phone. "What? The Henderson woman? She's walking up our driveway. Don't answer the door. I have to. If I don't, it looks like I'm hiding." The doorbell rang before Karen could change her mind. She smoothed her robe, ran her fingers through her hair, and opened the door. With her most practiced smile. "Good morning, Sarah. You're up early." Sarah stood on the doorstep wearing dirt-stained jeans and a t-shirt that had seen better decades. Her dark hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and there were streaks of mud on her arms. She looked like she'd been working manual labor for hours, which Karen realized she had, but her eyes were bright with something Karen had never seen there before: confidence. "Morning, Karen. I wanted to thank you." The words hit Karen like a slap. "Excuse me. Yesterday, when you cited all those regulations and permit requirements, it made me realize I needed to do my homework." Sarah held up the manila folder. "Turns out there's a lot of interesting reading in the county records." Karen's smile felt like it was carved from ice. "For instance, did you know that when someone files multiple frivolous complaints against the same property owner, and those complaints result in financial distress that benefits the complainant, it can be classified as harassment under state law?" The words hung in the morning air like a challenge. Karen's hand tightened on the doorframe. "That's a very serious accusation, Sarah." "It's not an accusation. It's a legal definition." Sarah opened the folder and pulled out a document. "This is a complaint I filed with the State Attorney General's office at 11:47 p.m. last night. It details a pattern of behavior that looks an awful lot like real estate fraud." Karen felt the ground shifting beneath her feet, but years of HOA board meetings had taught her to never show weakness. "I think you're overwrought from your recent ... difficulties, perhaps. We should discuss this when you're thinking more clearly." "I'm thinking very clearly." Sarah pulled out another document. "This is a timeline showing every property acquisition your family has made in this neighborhood over the past 3 years. It's interesting how many of those purchases happened right after the previous owners were hit with HOA violations. We're investors, Sarah. We buy properties that represent good value. You create the conditions that make them good value." Sarah's voice was steady, but Karen could hear the steel underneath. "You use your position on the planning commission and your husband's law firm to weaponize bureaucracy against your neighbors. That's ridiculous." "Is it?" Because I also filed a complaint with the county ethics board, and I sent copies of everything to Channel 7's investigative unit. Apparently, they love stories about suburban corruption. Karen's composure cracked. You can't prove anything. I can prove that you filed complaints against every property owner on this street who sold to you in the past 3 years. I can prove that those complaints always resulted in expensive delays and legal fees. I can prove that your husband's firm represented the HOA in every single case. Sarah smiled, and it wasn't friendly. And I can prove that you knew exactly which regulations to cite yesterday because you've used them before. The morning air felt suddenly thin. Karen glanced over Sarah's shoulder and noticed Mrs. Chen from across the street collecting her newspaper, clearly listening to every word. I think this conversation is over, Karen said, moving to close the door. Sarah stepped forward, not aggressively but firmly enough to make Karen hesitate. Actually, it's just beginning. See, I spent most of last night on the phone with some of your former neighbors, the Johnsons from 1251, the Garcias from 1239. They're very interested in joining a class action lawsuit. A lawsuit. Karen's voice cracked slightly. Conspiracy, fraud, harassment, intentional infliction of emotional distress. My attorney thinks we have an excellent case. Your attorney. Karen laughed, but it sounded forced. Sarah, you can barely afford to keep your lights on. Where are you going to get money for an attorney? Sarah's smile widened. Contingency fee, apparently. When lawyers smell blood in the water, they're happy to work for a percentage of the settlement. Karen felt her world tilting. Everything she'd built, every carefully orchestrated acquisition, every perfectly executed legal maneuver was all suddenly at risk because of one desperate single mother with nothing left to lose. You're making a mistake, Karen said quietly. You don't know who you're dealing with. Robert has connections throughout the county. We have resources you can't imagine. And I have nothing left to lose, Sarah replied. Do you know what that makes me? Karen didn't answer. Dangerous. After Sarah left, Karen sank into her leather dining chair and called Robert back. How bad is it? He asked without preamble. Bad. She's filed complaints with the AG, the ethics board, and she's talking to reporters. Shit, Robert, she knows. About all of it. The properties, the timing, the complaints. She has documentation. Okay, let me think. Karen could hear Robert's keyboard clicking in the background. She's bluffing about the attorney. Has to be. No one's going to take a case like this on contingency without serious money behind it. What if she's not bluffing? Then we have bigger problems. The keyboard clicking stopped. Karen, I need you to listen to me very carefully. Do not I cannot stress this enough. Do not contact her again. Don't file any more complaints. Don't call the county. Don't even look at her sideways. We can't just let her. We can, and we will. Any action we take now will look like retaliation. We need to let this blow over. And if it doesn't blow over, Robert was quiet for a long moment. Then we might need to cut our losses. After hanging up, Karen walked through her house, taking inventory of everything she stood to lose. The marble countertops, the hardwood floors, the professionally designed landscaping, all of it, built on a foundation of careful manipulation and legal intimidation. She'd been so focused on acquiring Sarah's property that she'd never considered what would happen if someone actually fought back. But Sarah had underestimated something too. Karen Blackwood didn't just have money and connections. She had something much more dangerous, complete. Willingness to destroy anyone who threatened her carefully constructed life. By noon, Karen had made 17 phone calls. The first was to James Morrison, the county compliance officer who'd shut down Sarah's pool removal the day before. Morrison owed the Blackwoods 3 favors from various zoning disputes over the years. Jim, it's Karen Blackwood. I need you to do me a favor. What kind of favor? The Henderson property on Maple Grove. I need you to go back out there and document every possible violation you can find. Karen, I was just there yesterday. The pool situation is resolved. Not the pool, everything else. Fence, height, drainage, landscaping, property line, encroachment. Make it thorough. Morrison was quiet. Karen, that would look like harassment. No, Jim, that would look like doing your room B12 of the Willowbrook Community Center. Hadn't seen this much activity since the heated town halls over the proposed shopping mall 3 years ago. Sarah arrived at 6:45 p.m. to find cars already filling the parking lot, not just the expected handful, but dozens of vehicles representing families from across the county. Maria Garcia met her at the entrance, a woman in her 50s with steel gray hair, and eyes that held the particular intensity of someone who'd lost everything and learned to survive anyway. 14 families became 28, Maria said. Without preamble, word spread faster than we expected. Inside the meeting room, Sarah was struck by the diversity of the gathering. Young families like hers sat next to elderly couples, recent immigrants next to multi-generational residents. The only thing they had in common was a particular wariness in their expressions, the look of people who'd been systematically hunted. Ladies and gentlemen, Maria called the room to order. Most of you know why we're here. For those who don't, let me introduce Sarah Henderson. She's the one who finally stood up to Karen Blackwood. A murmur of appreciation rippled through the room. Sarah felt the weight of their expectations and realized that somewhere between removing her pool and walking into this room, she'd stopped being a victim and become a leader. "I want to be clear about something," Sarah began, her voice carrying. To the back of the room, "I didn't set out to be anyone's hero. I just wanted to keep my house and take care of my daughter. But what I've learned in the past 48 hours is that the Blackwoods aren't just bad neighbors. They're running a criminal enterprise." She opened her laptop and connected it to the room's projector. The first slide showed a map of their neighborhood with color-coded dots representing property ownership. Red dots are properties currently owned by Blackwood Holdings LLC, Sarah explained. Blue dots are properties they've attempted to acquire in the past 3 years. Green dots are the remaining independent homeowners. The pattern was unmistakable. The Blackwoods controlled nearly 60% of the properties in a 12-block radius, with the remaining 40% clustered in pockets that were clearly their next targets. Now watch this. Sarah clicked to the next slide, showing a timeline. These are the dates of HOA complaints filed against Blue Dot properties. Overlaid with the dates, those properties went into financial distress. The correlation was perfect. Every family that had received multiple complaints had sold within 18 months, almost always to Blackwood Holdings for significantly below market value. An elderly man in the front row raised his hand. "George Patterson, 1425 Oak Street. Mrs. Henderson, this is impressive research, but what can we actually do about it? These people have lawyers, money, political connections. Mr. Patterson, you're right about their resources, but they also have vulnerabilities." Sarah clicked. To the next slide. "This afternoon, I received a call from the State Attorney General's office. They're opening a formal investigation into HOA fraud based on my complaint." Excited murmurs filled the room. "But that's not all," Sarah continued. "The county prosecutor is also interested because what the Blackwoods are doing might violate federal RICO statutes." Maria Garcia leaned forward. "RICO is an organized crime. RICO applies to any pattern of racketeering activity conducted through an organization. Systematic fraud, conspiracy, mail fraud, wire fraud, all of which appear to be present in the Blackwood operation." A woman in the back raised her hand. "I'm Lisa Chundoctor, Chen's wife. Sarah, my husband told me about Karen's phone call this morning. She's not backing down. If anything, she's escalating." "I know. This afternoon, I received notice of 3 separate compliance inspections scheduled for my property next week. Karen's trying to bury me in bureaucracy. So, what's our strategy?" Asked a man Sarah didn't recognize. Sarah looked around the room at the faces, watching her expectantly. 3 days ago, she'd been a powerless single mother facing foreclosure. Now she was somehow coordinating a multifamily resistance against suburban corruption. "Our strategy is documentation, media exposure, and legal action. But first, we need to understand exactly how deep this goes." She clicked to the next slide, and the room fell silent. It was an organizational chart showing connections between Blackwood Holdings, the law firm of Morrison Blackwood and Associates, the County Planning Commission, the Municipal Development Authority, and half a dozen HOA management companies. "Spent today following money trails and corporate filings," Sarah explained. "The Blackwoods don't just manipulate individual HOAs, they control the entire system." Maria Garcia whistled low. "How is that possible?" Robert Blackwood's law firm represents 80% of the HOAs in this county. Karen sits on the planning commission that approves new developments. Together, They influence zoning decisions, development approvals, and community management policies for thousands of properties. That's George Patterson struggled for words. That's like controlling the entire housing market. Exactly. And here's the really disturbing part. Sarah clicked again, revealing a new document. I found incorporation papers for something called Willowbrook Community Development Corporation, filed 6 months ago. The listed officers are Robert and Karen Blackwood, plus 3 members of the county council. The room erupted in angry voices as people realized the implications. They're going corporate, Lisa Chen said over the noise. This isn't just about our neighborhood anymore. Sarah nodded grimly. Based on the development plans I found, they're targeting the entire west side of the county, 47 neighborhoods, nearly 3,000 homes. The magnitude of the scheme silenced the room. My God, whispered a young mother Sarah hadn't met. How many families? Approximately 8,000 people, Sarah replied, all targeted. For displacement so the Blackwoods can control and redevelop their properties, George Patterson stood up slowly. Mrs. Henderson, what you're describing isn't just fraud, it's economic warfare against working families. Yes, Sarah said simply. It is. Maria Garcia's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, then looked up with a grim expression. Channel 7 just called. They want to move up your interview to tonight. Apparently, they've received additional information about the Blackwoods that they want to include in tomorrow's broadcast. What kind of additional information? They wouldn't say over the phone, but they're sending a crew here in 30 minutes. The room exploded in nervous chatter. Sarah felt her stomach clench. She'd prepared for an interview in controlled circumstances, not an ambush with cameras and bright lights while surrounded by 24 anxious neighbors. It's okay, she told herself, as much as the room. This is what we wanted. Media attention means public pressure, and public pressure means justice. But as the meeting broke up and people scattered to their cars, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that she was missing something important. The Blackwoods had operated their scheme for years without detection. It seemed unlikely they'd be undone by a single news story, no matter how damaging. The Channel 7 news crew arrived at 8:15 p.m., led by investigative reporter Amanda Wright, whose expose SOs on municipal corruption had won 2 regional Emmy Awards. Wright was younger than Sarah had expected, probably early 30s. With sharp eyes and the confident bearing of someone who'd learned to ask uncomfortable questions, Mrs. Henderson, thank you for meeting with us on short notice. I understand. You've uncovered some disturbing information about local real estate practices. That's correct. Sarah had decided to be completely straightforward. I believe the Blackwoods are operating a criminal conspiracy to systematically displace homeowners throughout this county. Wright's cameraman began recording as Wright pulled out a tablet. Before we discuss your allegations, I want to show you something we received this afternoon. She turned the tablet toward Sarah, revealing an email thread that made Sarah's blood run cold. The emails were between Robert Blackwood and someone identified only as municipal liaison, discussing specific properties and families by name. Sarah's name appeared multiple times, along with detailed discussions of her financial situation, her work schedule, and even Emma's school attendance records. Where did you get these? Sarah asked, her voice barely steady. Anonymous source. But we've verified their authenticity. Mrs. Henderson, these emails suggest that the Blackwoods have access to confidential financial and personal information about you and your neighbors, information they shouldn't legally be able to obtain. Sarah scrolled through the emails, her shock growing with each message. The Blackwoods knew about her mortgage payment history, her credit card balances, her ex-husband's child support payments. They knew her work schedule, Emma's after-school activities, even her grocery shopping patterns. This is stalking, she whispered. It's worse than stalking. Look at this one. Wright pointed to an email dated 2 weeks ago. S. Henderson showing financial stress indicators. Recommend accelerating timeline for Maple Grove acquisition. Suggest pool violation as initial pressure point. They planned it, Sarah said, the words coming out flat with shock. The pool complaint, the permit issues, all of it. They planned it weeks in advance, based on illegally obtained personal information. Wright confirmed. Mrs. Henderson, we believe the Blackwoods have been conducting systematic surveillance on dozens of